Beyond Time's Gaze, Episode 30. At the end of the previous episode, ignoring the young man's strange and seemingly crazy words, Shu Qing calmly wrote the word idiot on a bamboo slip, then put it away. He immediately activated the defensive formation of his Dharma skeef and prepared to leave, intending to keep his distance from the eccentric cultivator. Just as he was about to form an incantation gesture to depart, a loud rumble echoed from afar. Shu Qing turned to look toward the battlefield where the 7 Blood Eyes cultivators were fighting the sea zombies. There, he saw the mangled upper body of a sea zombie gold core cultivator crash into the sea, creating a massive wave before sinking beneath the water. Seeing this, Shu Qing's pupils shrank, realizing that the battle in the distance had reached a terrifying level. With even gold core experts being killed, Shu Qing recognized that sea zombie as the same one First Peak Lord had slashed with his sword. This was apparently the second grievous injury he had sustained, though it wasn't possible to tell if he was alive or dead. If he wasn't dead, he would be soon. Looking at the spot where he had fallen, Shu Qing's eyes lit up in the same way the captain's eyes had lit up upon seeing Join's flesh. The First Peak disciple was also looking at the same thing. Although he seemed hesitant, Shu Qing thought about it for a moment, and then a look of determination appeared on his face. Beneath his Dharma skiff, his snake-necked dragon suddenly shot down toward the sinking remains of the sea zombie cultivator. The body was in bad shape. Its lower half was gone, as was its head, leaving behind only the torso. Vast quantities of black blood spewed out of it into the surrounding water. The sea zombie's chest was still. It really seemed as if he was dead, as his snake-necked dragon reached the torso and prepared to bite it. The torso suddenly twitched, and its arm lifted. Its hand touched the snake-necked dragon, whose entire body collapsed. The only thing left behind was the armored mackerel's core. However, the dragon quickly reformed back around that. Meanwhile, the sea zombie cultivator seemed to have drained the last of his strength. His hand dropped, and his aura seemed incredibly weak. In fact, the mere act of moving his arm had made many of his chest wounds worse, eyes narrowing. Shu Qing performed a double-handed incantation gesture, sending his snake-necked dragon back in for another bite. This time, the sea zombie twitched again, severely damaging the dragon, but at the same time, the dragon managed to bite off some flesh. In this case, it was a finger. Shu Qing wasn't going to go down himself, and instead reformed the snake-necked dragon. He wasn't hiding what he was doing. So off to the side, the First Peak disciple saw everything. At first he seemed suspicious, but when he realized what Shu Qing was doing, his eyes lit up. Looking at Shu Qing, then looking down into the water, he watched as the snake-necked dragon made a second attempt. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the sea zombie's arm exploded, causing the snake-necked dragon to collapse. Seeing that, Shu Qing shot to his feet. However, that was when the First Peak disciple laughed heartily, and before Shu Qing could do anything else, dove into the water and went down toward the sinking sea zombie. Shu Qing dove into the water right behind him and pretended to try to catch up, though he intentionally hung back a bit. He had never planned to be the first into the water. Despite the tests with his snake-necked dragon, he was still leery. After all, this was a cultivator on the same level as one of the sect elders. Even in the dilapidated state he was in, it was still possible he had life-saving items on him. That wasn't even to mention the bizarre recovery capabilities of the sea zombies, which Shu Qing himself had personally witnessed. Therefore, he would rather have someone else go ahead of him to check out the situation. As for whether this disciple from the First Peak would end up dead, Shu Qing doubted it. The disciple obviously had more life-saving items hidden away on him. And if he really got into a deadly situation, Shu Qing was fairly confident he could save him using his shadow. Having reached the conclusion that this was definitely the best idea, Shu Qing kept his distance and watched as the First Peak disciple got close to the sea zombie cultivator. As the First Peak disciple neared, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, summoning a host of swords that he sent flying down. He wasn't stupid. Although he had beat Shu Qing into the water, he was worried the whole thing might be a trick. However, the temptation was too great for him to resist, so he had gone ahead. That said, he was still going to do some of his own testing. Just as his swords were about to reach their target, the sea zombie cultivator's chest suddenly opened up, and a glob of black blood appeared, which transformed into a vicious ghost. Roaring, it flew toward the First Peak disciple. That roar contained shockingly violent power, which smashed all of the incoming swords and caused blood to ooze out of the First Peak disciple's eyes. ears, nose, and mouth. Pulling out a jade pendant, he crushed it, causing a defensive barrier to appear while he fell back. Terror written on his face, however, at the same time, Shu Qing rushed past him, heading at top speed toward the sea zombie cultivator. Again, the ghost on the sea zombie's chest roared. As it did, Shu Qing's eyes glittered coldly, and a black umbrella appeared, opening up and bearing the brunt of the attack as the sound once again rumbled out. Shu Qing trembled violently, and blood oozed out of him. But at the same time, a dagger of black flame appeared in his right hand, and he thrust it out viciously toward the ghost. The ghost writhed as black flames swept out over it. Then, a second ghost appeared on the sea zombie's chest, and it also unleashed a roar. Shu Qing was shoved backward by about 30 meters. Meanwhile, the sea zombie cultivator took advantage of the moment to accelerate downward into the water. He was trying to flee. Shu Qing's eyes flickered coldly. In the brief contact he had made with the sea zombie, he could sense a scrap of its discarnate soul. That alone was tempting, but more than that, he had noticed a bag of holding on the sea zombie. There was no way he would let this opportunity slip through his fingers. It wasn't often that you would run into a dying cultivator on the level of a sect elder, and even if you did, it wouldn't necessarily be possible to take their belongings. His mind made up. Shu Qing shot toward the rapidly sinking sea zombie corpse. His snake-neck dragon swirled down to surround him, helping him pick up speed, and his Dharma skiff also sank under the surface of the water, glittering as it prepared an attack of godliness. Meanwhile, the first peak disciple watched with wide eyes as Shu Qing shot down. Although he was tempted by the possibilities of this situation, he didn't feel like it was worth risking his life over. After all, he was the ninth highness of the first peak. He didn't mind taking some risks, but putting his life on the line blithely wasn't an option. He had a bright future ahead of him, but Shu Qing was going for it, and he was connected to Shu Qing with a lifelink talisman. If Shu Qing died, he would die as well, and vice versa. While only moments ago, he had felt very pleased because of that. Now he was feeling very nervous. He was also starting to think that his master might not be the amazing genius he'd thought. After vacillating for a moment, he gritted his teeth, uttered a curse in his heart, and followed after Shu Qing in order to pick up speed. He bit his tongue, spitting out some blood to use his secret magic and turn into a blood sword. After all, he was worried this seventh peak lunatic would get himself killed if he didn't hurry up. As he neared, he took out a life-saving jade amulet and, despite how much it pained him, tossed it to Shu Qing. Shu Qing grabbed it. When the first peak disciple saw that, he sighed deeply and mused that he really shouldn't have tried to steal this person's sea beast, instead of feeling free from worry thanks to the lifelink talisman. He felt more like he'd become a Dao protector. Feeling very frustrated, he watched as Shu Qing headbutted the sea zombie corpse. Picking up some speed, he hurried to help, keeping an eye out for his own safety, but simultaneously making sure Shu Qing was safe as well. And thus, the two of them engaged in a bitter fight with a sea zombie under the surface of the water. The sea zombie only had a discarnate soul left in him, but the ghost projections he could create were still formidable. Both Shu Qing and the first peak disciple took significant damage. The way Shu Qing seemed to disregard his own life made the first peak disciple very frustrated. So he kept giving him life-saving items, while also using his own trump cards in the hope of ending the battle sooner. Eventually, Shu Qing completely stopped defending himself. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture. Black flames erupted, and he started extracting the soul power while the first peak disciple protected him. Anyone who saw how this was playing out would be deeply stunned. Finally, the first peak disciple gritted his teeth and backed away, convinced that Shu Qing wasn't actually suicidal and that he would take over defending himself. Shu Qing just looked at him coldly, then ignored him and kept up the assault on the sea zombie. The first peak disciple watched in shock. When he saw Shu Qing nearly die a few times, he howled inwardly and threw out some more defensive jade talismans. A bitter look on his face, he also joined in on the attack. He put all of his frustration into his attacks. The battle lasted all day. Eventually, Shu Qing had extracted all of the sea zombie's discarnate soul and had also taken his bag of holding. At that point, both he and the first peak disciple were completely exhausted. Back on the Dharma skiff, the first peak disciple whipped out a sword and held it up to his own throat. Gasping for breath, and his eyes filled with incomparable determination, he gritted his teeth and said, "During tomb sweeping, 2 incense sticks are burning." heartbreak is avoided when splitting the earnings. I don't understand, Shu-Ching replied coolly. Putting the bag of holding away, the first peak disciple's eyes were completely bloodshot as he stared at Shu-Ching. After some struggling, he forced himself to speak like a normal person for the second time. We split the loot. If you don't, I'll kill myself right in front of you. Shu-Ching looked at him and saw the determination in his eyes. And as he thought about it, he realized the young man had been a big help. He had worked hard keeping Shu-Ching safe, to the point where he actually seemed superior to an ordinary Dao protector. Opening the bag of holding, he dumped it out between the two of them. A mass of items fell out into a huge pile, including a stack of spirit notes, a vast assortment of spirit notes and jade slips, some medicinal pill bottles, various crafting ingredients, and the like. There were two particular jade slips that emanated powerful fluctuations. Shu-Ching had seen jade slips like this before. They were like the life-saving items the first peak disciple had used. Given the fluctuations, they were obviously very impressive. Shu-Ching had also seen things like them in shops in the port district and knew that they hadn't been created by Foundation establishment cultivators. Instead, they had been made by gold core cultivators. Of course, mere jade couldn't contain the full might of a gold core cultivator, so such jade slips usually contained only a bit of gold core power. These two slips seemed recently crafted and weren't something this sea zombie would have needed. In all likelihood, they had been intended as gifts for someone else. There was also a piece of jade carved into the shape of a feather. When Shu-Ching and the first peak disciple saw it, both of their eyes glittered. A magical device, Shu-Ching thought. The spirit breath lamp was a magical device, and his iron skewer was, in some ways at least, similar to a magical device. Magical devices existed between talisman treasures and magical treasures, and were items that had been created by a cultivator. However, they were not as powerful as the legendary magical treasures, and they were categorized into the tiers of lesser, greater, and superior. Few cultivators would ever have the opportunity to get a magical treasure, and magical devices were similarly rare. Shu-Ching didn't hesitate for a moment to reach out and grab the jade feather. The first peak disciple also reached out at the same time, but he didn't reach for the feather. Instead, he picked up something that didn't look very impressive at all. It was an iron box. When Shu-Ching noticed the box, his pupils constricted. He had seen two other boxes like this. The first had been in the possession of Horsefor back in the scavenger base camp. The second had been with the young merman. To this day, Shu-Ching still had no idea what they were, and in all of the shops he had visited in the capital city, he never saw anything like them. Today, he saw a third one. However, exactly as he laid eyes on it, the first peak disciple snatched it and put it into his robe. Looking vigilantly at Shu-Ching, 100 mouthfuls of blood were coughed up today. Splitting the earnings is what true heroes do. Talk like a normal person, Shu-Ching said coldly. Then he waved his hand, activating the Dharma skiff's defenses and making it impossible for the first peak disciple to leave. Seeing this, the first peak disciple sighed. Then he punched himself in the gut, causing himself to cough up a mouthful of black blood. After confirming that he had been poisoned, he used his secret magic to suppress it, then looked helplessly at Shu-Ching. All the while, he mused that people from the 7th peak really lacked good character. This guy put poison on his own Dharma skiff. Was he trying to kill himself? A long moment passed in which Shu-Ching just stared. Finally, the first peak disciple sighed and said, "We said we'd split the loot, right? I just want this. You can have everything else." Without a word, Shu-Ching collected all the other items together. As he did, he happened to notice a 7-colored medallion. It had been crafted of wood, and appeared to be an identity medallion. It looked quite well worn. From the patina on the surface of the wood, it seemed like it had been handled frequently by someone. Shu-Ching studied at it, then looked up at the first peak disciple. In the vast wilds, people flocked to the... Before he could finish with his poem, he noticed Shu-Ching frowning and stopped talking. Worried that if he didn't make himself clear, Shu-Ching might not cooperate, he again forced himself to talk like a normal person. "It's an identity medallion from the 7-sect coalition. Since we got it from a sea zombie, it probably means that, in life, he was a 7-sect coalition cultivator." "What's that other thing you picked up?" Shu-Ching asked. The first peak disciple hesitated. Obviously, this 7th peak disciple didn't know what a wishbox was. Originally, he'd intended to not explain, but then he decided that might not be a good idea. If the 7th peak disciple thought he was trying to keep some astounding treasure, It could lead to a very dangerous situation. Shaking his head helplessly, he said, "It's a wish box. Wish boxes contain gifts from cultivators from a previous epoch, placed inside specifically to be received by other cultivators in subsequent epochs. After the broken face of the god arrived, this tradition began as a way to mark the ending of epochs in the revered ancient mainland. In the last days of an epoch, wish boxes will be created using special materials. A lot of them have been created over the years. At first, the first peak disciple had found it difficult to speak without poetry. But the more he talked, the easier it became. In fact, it actually felt somewhat comfortable. Wish boxes are specially made to be able to survive the ending of an epoch. I've heard that some people have found wish boxes that look like coffins and contain dead cultivators. Other people find wish boxes that are empty. There's no way to know what's inside before you open it. Each box contains items sealed inside by a different powerful expert. In other words, that person is the only one who could know what the box contains. I've heard of people finding magical treasures, techniques, things like that. Sometimes a wish box will contain nothing more than some leaves or other random things. In some cases, it can be completely worthless. In the final analysis, it all comes down to how lucky you are. I've already opened 3 wish boxes, and none of them had anything spectacular in them, but I have the feeling this is the time I'm going to get lucky. They're easy to open. You just concentrate your Dharma force on the box, and it'll open, though it's usually a slow process. The reason I want this one is that you can tell the Dharma force concentration has already reached the point where it will open soon. Apparently, once the first peak disciple started talking, he would keep going without giving any opportunities for interruption. After he finished speaking, he backed up a few steps and looked vigilantly at Shu Qing. "If you don't agree, then I'll give you the wish box in exchange for that magical device and those 2 jade talisman treasures." After mulling the matter over, Shu Qing opened his Dharma skiff's defenses. From that, the first peak disciple realized that Shu Qing was allowing him to leave. He quickly flew off the boat and landed on his sword. Shu Qing looked away from him, sat down cross-legged, and sent his Dharma skiff back in the direction of 7 Blood Eyes. He wanted to get rid of the lifelink talisman as quickly as possible. Although his shadow was eating away at the mark, the process was too slow and felt like a waste of time. As he sat there, he started going through the items he'd acquired. The bag of holding had belonged to a gold core cultivator, and it contained some astonishing things. The spirit notes alone were worth more than 200,000 spirit stones. Granted, they weren't 7 Blood Eyes spirit notes, but he could exchange them in the sect for a small fee. Shu Qing estimated that he could sell the random items in the bag for a few 100,000 spirit stones. As for the 2 jade talismans, they were probably worth a few tens of thousands of spirit stones. What was worth the most was the magical device shaped like a feather. It was a shocking haul. However, Shu Qing had the feeling that a gold core cultivator should have a lot more belongings. This was probably only a small portion of his true savings. After all, most people didn't just have 1 bag of holding. What a pity. I guess whoever injured him must have taken his other things. Either that, or he kept them somewhere else. Sighing, he focused inwardly on the discarnate soul that was just now beginning to burn as kindling. Let's see what an elder-level discarnate soul can do, and the balefire soul-swallowing scripture supposedly works great on sea zombies. I wonder how many Dharma apertures I can open. He checked his Dharma skiff defenses, then looked at the first peak disciple, who seemed very much on guard. Then he closed his eyes and focused on the black flames within him. All 13 of his Dharma apertures raged with balefire, burning the sea zombie discarnate soul. Then he sent the resulting soul force toward his 14th Dharma aperture. The Dharma aperture trembled and then opened. But the process didn't stop there. Under Shu Qing's control, the power of the burning discarnate soul continued to his 15th Dharma aperture, which also opened, then his 16th and 17th. It was only after the 20th opened that the discarnate soul finally faded away. I opened 7 Dharma apertures. Although he had anticipated something like this might happen, it was still surprising, and his eyes shone brightly as a result. The more Dharma apertures you opened, the harder it became to open new ones. And once he had gone past 10, he had increasingly sensed that the soul power he needed was reaching ridiculous levels. Despite that, this discarnate soul had allowed him to open 7 in a row, which suddenly made him wish he could find more such souls. Sadly, it's too hard. Xu Qing knew full well that he had only succeeded with the help of the young man from the first peak. Without all the life-saving items he'd given, it would never have worked. I made out quite well. Now I just need to get back to the sect, remove the lifelink talisman, then come out to sea again. Before long, I should be able to form my life flame. At this point, Xu Qing focused on gathering Dharma force in his Dharma apertures. At the same time, he took out the feather-shaped magical device. After inspecting it closely, he sent some Dharma force into it. Gradually, 3 days passed, while Xu Qing focused on his Dharma apertures and the magical device. The first peak disciple worked on the wish box. When it finally reached the point where he knew he could open it, he looked over to confirm that Xu Qing was working on his cultivation. Then he slowed down a bit to put some distance between himself and the Dharma skiff. Finally, he waved his hand to summon a defensive barrier that would give him some privacy. As he held the iron box in his hands, his eyes shone with excitement. He had not been lying to Xu Qing. He really had opened 3 wish boxes in the past. However, what he hadn't revealed was that the first one he opened contained an ancient jade slip. Although the slip itself wasn't valuable, it had contained information about the ancient emperors and imperial sovereigns. Information like that was worth a lot. Specifically, that ancient jade slip told the life story of 3 specific ancient emperors. The first peak disciple had become fascinated with those stories, especially the detail about how ancient Emperor Dark Serenity loved hiding profound truths in poetry. That had been very inspiring. Taking a deep, excited breath, the first peak disciple again made sure that Xu Qing wasn't looking at him. Rubbing his hands in anticipation, he hit himself on the forehead and then landed a blow on the pit of his stomach. Then he went into a ritualistic prayer with his eyes closed. After enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, his eyes opened and he reached down and put his hands on the box. A cracking sound rang out. There had been no visible cracks on the box before. It had seemed like a pure lump of metal, but now it opened exactly like a box to reveal a finger-sized jade bottle. It already had dark spots on it, making it look very old, and it seemed to contain a medicinal liquid of some sort. Next to it was an ancient jade slip. The first peak disciple's heart started pounding. The first wish box he had opened had contained something interesting, but the other 2 had been completely worthless. Therefore, seeing that this box not only had an ancient jade slip, but also a bottle with medicinal liquid in it, he couldn't help but be excited. "I struck pay dirt," he murmured. Suddenly realizing that he was getting too used to speaking normally, he cleared his throat. All the misery at sea was not in vain. Prosperity surges to amazing heights. Feeling a bit better, he picked up the bottle, studied it for a bit, and then opened it. Almost immediately, a very unusual odor wafted out. The first peak disciple had no idea what was in the bottle, but the odor stimulated his psyche, giving him the feeling that the liquid was still effective. Chuckling, he murmured, "Jade dragons and heavenly spirits give good fortune, yet only I shall benefit from it." That said, he didn't dare to consume the liquid. After taking another whiff, he closed the bottle and looked at the ancient jade slip. The moment he inspected it, a message from inside rang into his mind. "Greetings and best wishes, O ye destined one. I waste born in the dark serenity epoch, and blessed with the Tao by an ancient emperor. I knoweth not whether the god Ru Kang existeth in thy time. This wish didst containeth the treasure of a foolish friend, but in mine disdain I didst discard it as refuse and replace it with mine precious gift. That gift beeth mine bloodline. If thou beeth of the fairer sex, then bear thee mine descendants. Thank me not, O ye destined one. Fare thee well." The first peak disciple stared in shock. He believed himself to be very skilled in literary and academic arts. After all, he normally spoke in poetry. But the contents of this jade slip were bewildering, to the point where he needed to analyze everything bit by bit. Even after that, he still didn't feel that he understood completely, and could only stare blankly at the jade slip. Mine descendants? Wait, mine descendants? What descendants? And what does he mean by fairer sex? Isn't the term fairer sex used to describe women? Then he looked at the bottle, and his eyes went wide. There's no way. Then he thought back to how he'd smelled the contents of the bottle, and suddenly felt a bit queasy. This is ridiculous. He almost threw everything into the water, but couldn't quite bear to. After all, he basically had half of the bloodline of an ancient emperor. But why did it have to be the male side? Around this time, Shuqing opened his eyes and looked over from his Dharma skiff. Guessing that the first peak disciple had opened the box, and curious about the results, he said, "What did you get?" The defensive barrier around the sword faded away, and the first peak disciple sat there, an unsightly expression on his face as he breathed heavily through his nose. It almost seemed like he was trying to purge it of something. He even brought Dharma force through his nose until, eventually, his expression returned to normal. Looking up at the sky, he put the wish box away without saying a word. Shuqing felt even more curious now, but he looked away. Time passed as the two of them got closer and closer to 7 Blood Eyes. Along the way, Shuqing got more familiar with the feather-shaped magical device, which he came to realize augmented speed. When activated, it gave one explosive quickness that surpassed one's ordinary limit by many times over. However, it drew deeply on the fleshly body because he wasn't alone. He didn't want to test it out, but he could imagine what shocking levels of speed he could achieve if he did. I need to find a place to test it out and get familiar with how to actually use it. Around that time, he spotted a 7th peak Dharma boat off in the distance. The first peak disciple had seemed overwhelmed with boredom ever since opening the wish box. When he spotted the distant Dharma boat, he took out a new Taoist robe and put it on. He seemed so familiar with the process that it was a habit for him. Then his expression turned as cold as ice. Sword energy swirled out to surround him, making him look extremely vigilant. And as the sword energy swirled, it lifted his hair around him, such that any casual observer would think he was a very extraordinary person. However, it was apparently all an act. After the 7th peak Dharma boat passed by them, he slumped back down dejectedly. That, coupled with the rapid manner in which he changed clothes, was very strange to Shuqing. As time passed, they encountered more and more disciples from 7 Blood Eyes. The same thing happened each time. Shuqing got used to it. Eventually, Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior took advantage of the situation to quietly say, "My lord, this brat obviously cares a lot about outward appearances, given he's that kind of person. Maybe we don't need to kill him after all. People like that can sometimes be useful. When the moment is right, say a few flattering words to him. Based on the ancient records your humble servant has read, this is the kind of person who will shed blood for the sake of face. Furthermore, because your humble servant realized that he cares so much about face, I used a special technique to record images of this brat in his bedraggled state. I also recorded him speaking like a normal person. I'm not sure it will come in handy later, but at the very least, we have some things we can use against him. If you find the right opportunities, my lord, you should create some situations in which he'll lose a lot of face. For example, make him beg you for help, make him fall into some filth, that sort of thing. I'll make sure to get a recording of it, and then we'll have even more ammunition for when the time comes." The Patriarch spoke at a very rapid rate, and though he didn't emphasize his own role, it was obvious he was trying to prove his worth. "Also, my lord, I beg you to punish me for not thinking of this sooner. It took a lot of thought on the part of your humble servant, and I know I spent too much time coming up with the idea. Please, punish me, my lord. Please, I'm such a fool. My lord, your talents and mine are poles apart. If you just give me a chance, my lord, I'll work very hard. Please, in the future, let me handle small tasks like this, the grunt work, the dirty work. Just entrust those things to me. Master Free Spirit will work himself to the bone to do everything you ask me to do." Looking at the iron skewer, Shuqing quietly said, "You have 3 more months, but for your sake I'll add an extra month. The shadow gets the same advantage." The Patriarch was very excited and pretended to glance casually at the shadow. As for the shadow, it trembled, then stretched down into the seawater and started absorbing mutagen. Shuqing ignored them, closed his eyes, and started cultivating the life-nurturing incantation. As time passed, they got closer to the 7 Blood Eyes port. As ships and boats became more prevalent, the first peak disciple eventually put aside whatever was bothering him and stood in place looking determined and extraordinary. As Shuqing coldly sized him up, he noticed that he didn't seem as depressed as before. In fact, after glancing at Shuqing a few times, the first peak disciple calmly said, "In front of Chenghuang Temple grew a flower. Cultivators who passed it died more quickly." Hearing this, Shuqing reached down and rubbed his iron skewer. Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior discreetly released a ferocious aura that settled on the first peak disciple. The first peak disciple cleared his throat. He could obviously tell that Shu Qing didn't understand his poetry, but also wasn't inclined to explain what he meant out loud. Taking out a jade slip, he imprinted it with some information and tossed it to Shu Qing. Shu Qing frowned and caught it. Looking inside, he saw the message. "Brother, I think the two of us are connected by destiny. I'm the 9th Highness of the First Peak. Wu Jian Wu. You know the old saying, from an exchange of blows, friendship grows. You have a strong, baleful aura, but we're members of the same sect, and there's no need for us to be mortal enemies. Be careful about showing too much of a baleful aura outside the sect. I heard that, years ago, the conclave disciple elder brother Chen from the Third Peak had a strong baleful aura and ended up going missing. Even years later, his killer has never been found. Furthermore, the only son of the 6th Peak Lord also had a strong baleful aura, and he went missing too. Anyway, I urge you to handle matters judiciously." As Wu Jianwu stood atop his sword, he looked at Shu Qing examining the jade slip. Then he shot up into the sky in a blood-red streak, where he transformed into a huge sword. He looked extremely impressive. In the blink of an eye, he was a huge distance away from Shu Qing and his Dharma skeef. Just before he screamed through the sky toward the first peak, he uttered one final poem. "Surpass mortal life and be refined. I'll become an immortal and surpass mankind." As his words echoed out in all directions, quite a few people looked over in amazement. To them, this chosen disciple from the First Peak in his crimson robe, his hair swirling around him, really did seem like an immortal. Shu Qing watched coldly as he left. He wasn't bothered by Wu Jianwu's little act. And the closer they got to the sect, the less likely Shu Qing was to react violently to his annoying behavior. Looking away, Shu Qing piloted his Dharma skiff into port. Once he was inside, the lifelink talisman mark glittered with soft light, then faded into nothing. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief, glancing at Wu Jianwu, who was still flying toward the first peak. Shu Qing put away his Dharma skiff, then ascended into the air and flew toward his mansion grotto on the 7th peak. Landing outside, he checked the area to make sure all of the poison he'd placed in the area was still in place. Then he opened the door, entered, and sealed himself inside. "Now that I'm back, I need to go see how many spirit stones it will take to develop my own harbor. Living here on the peak is just too inconvenient. I'd rather just stay in my Dharma skiff." After some thought, he looked at his violet Taoist robe, and then thought back to how the captain and Zhang San both wore their grey robes. A grey robe did seem like the best decision. Next, he looked at the jade disc in the middle of the grotto, which pulsed softly with glowing light. That jade disc was the heart of the mansion grotto's spell formation and made the formation function without needing to add spirit stones into it. It also served as a recording device and would keep track of the details of everyone who had sent messages to see if he was able to accept visitors. He saw one request from Huang Yan, one from Zhou Qingpeng, 3 from Ding Shui, and 2 from Gu Muqing. There were 2 people who had made far more requests than the others. One was from the director of the Violent Crimes Division, who had sent 23 requests, and the other was from a Unit 6 constable. The Mute. He had sent 41 requests. In fact, it seemed that he had sent such requests on a daily basis. Shu Qing thought back to the day when he found the Mute on death's door and had spent a few moments to save him. Clearly, the Mute was strong and had survived the incident. Even as Shu Qing was examining the jade disc, it shimmered with light as another request from the Mute came in. Outsiders needed permission to visit on-peak cultivators, and that applied to off-peak disciples as well. After thinking about it for a moment, Shu Qing approved the request. Before long, an emaciated figure appeared cautiously outside of Shu Qing's mansion grotto. Opening the door, Shu Qing stepped out. "What do you want?" The Mute stood about 9 meters away, and obviously didn't want to get any closer. He was dressed the same as before, and all his wounds were healed. However, he seemed grimmer than before. Having returned from death's door, he seemed to have grown a lot. Shu Qing's gaze caused the Mute to shiver slightly. Taking out a medallion, he respectfully placed it off to the side, then backed up a few paces. Looking at Shu Qing, he then dropped to his knees and kowtowed, banging his head onto the ground so hard his forehead started bleeding. Then he stood and raced down the peak. Shu Qing watched him go. Then he made a grasping gesture with his right hand, and the medallion flew over to him. Examining it, he realized it wasn't an identity medallion, but rather an authentication device linked to a warehouse. Being familiar with the port district, Shuqing knew exactly what it was. The port district was generally divided into two halves. One was used by Seventh Peak disciples, and the other was for public use. All sorts of ships and boats would come in and out of it, sometimes even pirate vessels. Non-sect watercraft couldn't be put into bottles like Seven Blood Eyes Dharma boats and Dharma skiffs, so they needed to either lay anchor or be stored in dry dock. And to access such watercraft, one would need to use an authentication device. In Seven Blood Eyes, the only way to lay claim to a watercraft was to have an authentication device. Shuqing realized what was going on. After his gift of a dead criminal was rejected, the mute came to believe that Shuqing didn't like criminals. So he was offering an authentication device instead. This time, Shuqing accepted the gift. The next day, Shuqing went to the location linked to the authentication device. He found an average-sized trading vessel packed with ordinary cargo. It wasn't anything unusually valuable. What was noteworthy was that the cargo contained a lot of medicinal ingredients. The disciples in charge of the area cautiously explained that no one had come to claim the ship for 2 months. Shuqing collected the medicinal ingredients, then called his informant over to deal with the trading vessel. While she was there, he asked her about the matter of developing a new harbor. Lowering her voice, she said, "My lord, I learned everything there is to know about developing new harbors. I can explain everything. Sir, you can either open a sect harbor or a public harbor. Both have different advantages. Sect harbors aren't very profitable, but they're helpful in establishing information and power networks with off-peak disciples. Public harbors can be very profitable. However, they require the presence of a lot of sect departments to operate. For example, pilot assistance, dispatch, transportation, and so on. But even the simplest of harbors will bring in a lot of trading vessels, and thus astounding profit. Businesses will also want spots on the docks, and you get a share of their profits as well." His informant had held nothing back in her efforts to learn about this subject over the past 2 months. She had even spent a significant amount of spirit coins to get good information. However, she continued, the construction costs are high. Even the most bare-bones harbor will require an investment of 3 million spirit stones for all the initial construction. And if you want buildings for businesses to rent, that investment cost will rise to at least 10 million. Of course, the cost can go even higher depending on your requirements. Upon hearing this, Shuqing's facial expression didn't change, but inside he felt deeply shocked. He had considered himself somewhat wealthy, especially considering that the sea zombie bag of holding he'd looted had contained several 100,000 spirit stones worth of loot. But his informant's explanation left him a bit speechless. That said, the profits you'll earn are astounding. There's limited space in the Seven Blood Eyes port, and after spending some time observing the water traffic, I can tell you that every day about 30% of the vessels are forced to wait outside. If you open a public harbor, there won't be any lack of trading vessels who want to use it. My lord, after studying some of the other harbors and also doing some calculations, I think that if we invest 3 million to start, we can easily use subsequent profits to expand the initial construction. If things go smoothly, it will only take about 2 years to reach an equilibrium point. Then, it will take an additional 3 years to earn back your investment. After that, you should be able to make an annual profit of 3 million spirit stones. Furthermore, I asked around about other senior Foundation establishment cultivators who have opened harbors. Most of them don't make an investment solely with their own funds. Usually, they pool funds with others. My lord, if you have any friends you trust, it might be worth trying that. The only prerequisite is that they would also need to be Foundation establishment cultivators. Also, I heard that there are private investment firms that will lend money for harbor development, although there are a lot of restrictions in place by the sect, so it's not very common. Shuqing mulled the matter over. He had previously felt that he didn't want to waste the opportunity to open a harbor. After all, once he did, he would be able to rake in a significant annual profit without doing anything. That was why he'd asked his informant to gather all of this information. But now, though he still thought it would be an amazing opportunity, he also knew it was simply too expensive, and there was also a lot of complicated work involved. Furthermore, investing so many spirit stones in that manner would tie him deeply to the sect. All of these aspects made him hesitate. Now it made sense why so few Foundation establishment cultivators chose to open harbors. After more thought, He decided to abandon the idea. Dismissing his informant, he changed into a grey Taoist robe, then got ready to go shopping. There were a lot of things he needed to buy, including medicinal plants and talisman treasures. And he also wanted to check what magical devices were available. Magical devices were extremely expensive, so in the past, he hadn't even considered buying any. But he had some money to work with now, so he figured he'd at least look around. He was also very interested in the soul pills Wu Jianwu had used, and wanted to see if he could find a place that sold them. After all, they weren't that amazing, but did make it easy to absorb souls. And then there was the spirit breath lamp. As he walked along in his grey robe, he kept his cultivation base hidden, and thus looked like an ordinary disciple. However, he would occasionally sense people looking at him from within the crowd. Now, he realized that they were other Foundation establishment cultivators who, like him, were disguised in grey robes. When he spotted them in the crowd, they would lock gazes briefly, then part ways without causing any trouble for each other. Xuqing went to his usual spot for breakfast and sat down. The vendor called out a friendly greeting and brought some food. This time, Xuqing ate 4 eggs. Upon reaching Foundation establishment, it wasn't necessary for a cultivator to eat food. They could survive on Dharma force alone. But Xuqing enjoyed his usual routine and enjoyed the sensation of eating. As he ate, he took out his identity medallion and sent a voice message to Huang Yan, asking about whether he still wanted to buy the spirit breath lamp. Huang Yan didn't reply immediately. It was only after Xuqing was finished eating and getting ready to leave that the reply came in. "I'm in, Xuqing. Are you back? Where are you?" "I'll come find you." Hearing the reply, Xuqing's eyes gleamed with anticipation. He was really looking forward to having an additional 500,000 spirit stones. After telling Huang Yan where he was, he only had to wait a short time before the pudgy cultivator was rushing toward him. As it turned out, Huang Yan looked even pudgier than before, and his robe hardly seemed able to contain his girth. Upon catching sight of Xuqing, he laughed heartily and pulled out a thick stack of spirit notes. "These are 1,000 spirit stone notes directly from the 6th peak. 200 of them. I didn't have enough time to gather more than this. Can I make up the difference with a magical device?" With that, Huang Yan produced a black hauberk that he offered to Xuqing. "Magical device?" Xuqing said. Taking it, sending some Dharma force into the armor, he saw countless magical symbols arranged in a special design. At first glance, he estimated that there must be 100,000 of them. Obviously, this was a very extraordinary hauberk. "It's a myriad talismans hauberk," Huang Yan explained. "I'd planned to give it to my elder sister, but I think she'd like the spirit breath lamp more. If you sell it, you can easily get 300,000 spirit stones. It's a lesser-tier magical device, but it has good defensive qualities. With that on, you could hold your own for several rounds of combat against a Foundation establishment cultivator in the profound radiant state, as long as they don't have 2 life flames." Huang Yan seemed to know a lot about Foundation establishment. Obviously, his elder sister had helped him a lot in that regard. In fact, it seemed he was just on the verge of a breakthrough. Xuqing nodded and accepted the myriad talismans hauberk, then handed the spirit breath lamp over. "Do you need me to escort you back to the 7th peak?" Xuqing asked quietly. "Nah," Huang Yan replied, patting his belly. "Who would dare to steal a gift intended for my elder sister?" Putting the spirit breath lamp away, he took out his identity medallion to send a voice message to his elder sister. However, that was when he seemed to suddenly remember something and looked back at Xuqing. "Hey, Xuqing, remember I told you about the possibility of war? Well, it's definitely going to happen. You should think about whether or not you want to participate." With that, he waved goodbye and rushed off toward the 7th peak, watching him go. Xuqing sighed. Huang Yan really did have a lot of money. He just handed over hundreds of thousands of spirit stones, plus a magical device, all without hardly thinking about it. Up to this point, Xuqing had not looked into Huang Yan's background. There were some things that were taboo in 7 Blood Eyes, and he had no intention of violating those taboos. After Huang Yan was gone, Xuqing thought about his parting words. "War," he murmured. That was enough to make him completely forget about his idea of opening a harbor. Instead, he would invest in a street in the city. Although the profits wouldn't be as amazing, it would be better than nothing. Having made his decision, he went to find a shop that sold jade talismans. Most of the shops that catered to Foundation establishment cultivators were run by Sixth Peak disciples in the Rockbright district, as opposed to the Port district. Because prices were so high in such shops, they usually weren't very busy. Most of them had private viewing rooms and disciples trained in sales. After arriving in the Rockbright district, Shuqing looked around and settled on a shop called the Brightness Pavilion. It was one of the largest shops there, being fully 5 stories tall, with each story covering about 600 meters. It was extravagantly decorated inside, and the clerks, whether they were male or female, were all extremely good-looking. And there seemed to be more clerks than customers. Upon entering, Shuqing attracted a bit of attention. Though he only wore a grey robe, he was extremely good-looking, and thus, quite a few female clerks eyed him. He seemed to bring a bit of brightness to the shop. What was more, it was obvious that anyone who dared to enter a shop like this had to be extraordinary in some way. At the very least, he was a conclave disciple. Furthermore, since these clerks had dealt with lots of foundation establishment cultivators, they knew it was common for such people to wear grey robes. Several of the clerks made to walk over to Shuqing. However, the fastest of them was a pretty young woman with pigtails. Flushing a bit, she softly said, "Hello, elder brother. You can call me Little Hui. I'm happy to help you with whatever you need. I'm completely at your service. Here at the Brightness Pavilion, we specialize in tools, weapons, items, and the like. The first floor is devoted to magical treasures, the second floor to jade talismans, and the third floor to magical devices. Whatever you're looking for, elder brother, I can help you find it." Shuqing looked around and noticed that he was the only customer on the first floor. Furthermore, the walls were covered with all sorts of talisman treasures. Though they were all sealed, they still released extraordinary fluctuations. There were also a few crystal pillars upon which rested brightly glittered talisman treasures. The fact that they were being displayed as individual items indicated that they were very high quality. "I want to see your magical devices," Shuqing said. Looking back at the clerk, when the blushing girl heard that, her eyes glittered. "The magical devices are on the third floor. Allow me to lead the way." "Senior." Upon hearing that Shuqing wanted to shop for magical devices, this young woman, who had dealt with many Foundation establishment customers, immediately knew that Shuqing was also in Foundation establishment. It was for that reason that she switched from calling him elder brother to senior, eyes shining. She led the way instead of waiting for Shuqing to go ahead of her. There was nothing rude about the way she led the way. In fact, as she climbed the stairs, her garment clung more snugly to her hips, making her curves even more obvious. She was very seductive, but at the same time, her pigtails made her seem charming and innocent. Sadly for her, Shuqing didn't notice those things. When they reached the third floor, it was to the young woman's disappointment that she didn't get any sense Shuqing was attracted to her. However, she quickly dismissed her disappointment and led Shuqing to a private viewing room. There, she asked him for more details about what kind of magical devices he wanted to see. "Weapons," he replied, "under 300,000 spirit stones." Nodding, she left the room. A short time later, she returned with a tray, upon which were arrayed 3 items. One of them was a blue short sword, attached to which was a paper talisman that reduced its fluctuations by about 99%. The second item was a necklace, inlaid with 5 fingernail-sized black pearls. It was also sealed with a talisman. The final item was a small red bell. The frigid mountain sword contains the aura of the Forbidden Sea. Part of the forging process involves burying the sword for 3 years at the bottom of the sea, which imbues it with a shocking level of frigid coldness. With Dharma force, you can control that frigid energy. It's a very fast sword and is incomparably sharp. This is the 5 Bales pearl necklace. Each pearl contains a golden baleful aura that, upon being released, transforms into a golden lightning bolt of punishment that can kill anything it hits. Once hit, the victim must dispel the energy or they will die. To operate the necklace, fill it with Dharma force and inscribe the name of your opponent onto one of the pearls. Last is the living spirit bell. By ringing this bell, you can shake your opponent's soul into immobility. It is ineffective against grus, as it only works on opponents with fleshly bodies. This weapon has a weakness, as the wielder suffers the effects of the bell as much as the target. However, because it's a very rare magical device related to souls, it's more expensive than average magical devices. The frigid mountain sword costs 270,000 spirit stones. The 5 Bales pearl necklace costs 300,000 spirit stones. And the living spirit bell costs 330,000 spirit stones. Xu Qing's expression remained neutral as he looked over the three items. Inside, he was bemoaning the fact that magical devices were so expensive. But at the same time, he knew that, considering he couldn't enter the profound radiant state, he really needed the added benefit of having a magical device. That was especially true considering that war was coming. It made sense to start preparing now. Once the official announcement was made, prices would start climbing. Truth be told, he liked all three of these items, but he couldn't afford them all. He still had jade talismans to buy, as well as all sorts of poisonous plants. After further inspection, he finally gritted his teeth and chose the living spirit bell. Though the weapon had a weakness, he had a way of negating that weakness. He planned to attach the bell to his iron skewer and have Patriarch Golden Vajra Warrior use it. After all, the Patriarch didn't have a fleshly body. As a spirit automaton, he wouldn't suffer the adverse effects. "That one," he said, pointing at the bell. The clerk looked excited. Obviously, selling this magical device would come with a big commission for her. Being very respectful, she helped him take care of all the formalities of the purchase. Then, upon his request, she took him down to the second floor to browse the jade talismans. There, he purchased 3 defensive jade talismans and 1 talisman used for offense. In total, he spent 120,000 spirit stones on them. After leaving the shop, he rubbed his bag of holding and sighed. Back in chi condensation, he had believed cultivation resources to be expensive. Now that he thought back, he realized that the things he had believed to be too expensive actually weren't so bad. The jade talismans and magical devices required in Foundation establishment were really expensive. Upgrading my Dharmaskeef is also going to require a lot of spirit stones. Shaking his head, he tried not to think about how much money he had spent and headed toward the Second Peak's Clear Spirit District to shop for medicinal plants. After all, the medicinal plants available in the Clear Spirit District were on a different level than those available in the Port District. He also wanted to see if he could find some ghost-longing horseshoe crabs and chrysanthemum mollusks to buy. Both were critical in attracting sea beasts to open his Dharma apertures. However, as he was on his way to the Clear Spirit District, his identity medallion vibrated, and he took it out to find that Zhang San had just sent him a voice message. "Xu Qing, are you back?" "I got back yesterday," Xu Qing replied. "Where are you? Can you come meet me, or I can go to you? I have a business proposition I want to talk to you about. I'm heading to the Clear Spirit District to shop for medicinal plants." Xu Qing was curious what it was about and wondered if it had anything to do with the captain's visitor requests back in his mansion grotto. "Okay, do you know the 100 Plants workshop in the Clear Spirit District? Why don't we meet there?" Xu Qing thought the matter over as he headed to the Clear Spirit District. Eventually, he found the 100 Plants workshop, which was a very large establishment. In fact, it was one of the most famous Second Peak shops there was. Even before he got close, he spotted Zhang San waiting outside. Zhang San sat on one of the stone steps smoking a pipe, looking very unremarkable in his grey Taoist robe. When he saw Xu Qing, he grinned, stood, wiped the dust off his rear end and hurried over, pulling Xu Qing off to the side. He lowered his voice and said, "Junior brother Xu Qing, did you happen to talk to the captain since you got back?" "I haven't seen him," Xu Qing replied, looking curiously at Zhang San. "Okay, good. The crazy loon has been going around borrowing money like there's no tomorrow. He even tried to get me to put my port development rights as collateral for a loan. Said something about buying a technique to disguise yourself as another species. He keeps saying if he can get that technique, he can get a 1000% return on his investment. I have the feeling he'll hit you up for money eventually. Anyway, junior brother Xu Qing, do you still have your port development rights?" "Yeah." Xu Qing nodded. "Awesome," Zhang San said, laughing heartily. "Xu Qing, would you be willing to transfer your port development rights to me? It took some convincing, but I already got the captain to give me his. If I add yours into the mix, we can make a really big investment. I got some very reliable information indicating that the sect is going to war with the sea zombies soon. Of course, many people have speculated this will happen, but information like this means different things to different people. Everything is about context. When war comes, some people worry about personal safety. Some people think about earning merit points. Some people are just downright scared. Some people realize war can make you rich, but just don't know how to actually make it happen. Many of those people think that hoarding important resources to sell later is the way to go. But I'm different." Having reached this point in his explanation, a look of pride appeared on Zhang San's face. I'm telling you, Shu Qing, when war breaks out, it's the perfect opportunity to get really rich. If I were you, I wouldn't even think about some sort of hoarding scheme. It's useless, and also, most people hate that behavior. No, we're not going to make money off of fellow disciples. We're going to make money off the sect. The sect is definitely going to make a very big deal about this war with the sea zombies. And when the time comes, they're going to make full use of the harbors. Whether it comes to storing magical devices, prepping battleships, or providing transportation for disciples from the various mountain peaks, everything is going to focus around the harbors. Furthermore, there are limited harbors available. Therefore, if I take 3 harbors and develop them together into one larger harbor, the sect will definitely put that one on the top of their list to use. And of course, we'll charge for that. Therefore, we need to get this thing up and running before the war starts, with at least a few buildings and some extra berths. Based on my calculations, if the war lasts for 3 months, we'll make our entire investment back in that time. If it lasts for a year, we'll make quadruple profit. And if the war lasts even longer, then we could be sitting on the kind of opportunity that only comes around once every 100 years. We have to do this. Hearing this explanation from Zhang San, Shu Qing's eyes went wide, and he felt deep admiration for him. Zhang San obviously had great instincts when it came to making money, far beyond that of ordinary people, seeing the look on Shu Qing's face. Zhang San threw his head back and laughed. You look just like the captain did, Shu Qing. By the way, I don't need a single spirit stone from you. Just transfer your port development rights to me, and I'll handle the initial investment. After we break even, then we'll split the profit between you, the captain, and me, 25/25/50. Of course, we can keep the harbor running after the war, and we'll still keep making money. Zhang San looked expectantly at Shu Qing, awaiting his answer. Shu Qing considered the matter, then took out his port development authentication device and gave it to Zhang San. Zhang San's face lit up with enthusiasm. I guarantee that within a year, I'll be handing you at least a few million spirit stones of profit. Laughing again, he took out his identity medallion and started contacting people in his network to start the project. Then he waved goodbye and left. Shu Qing watched him go. He couldn't help but think that Zhang San really was a genius. Not only was he amazing with equipment forging, he also seemed to make good progress in cultivation, and also was amazing at making money. I hope that in a year I really do get a good split of profit. The thought of making millions of spirit stones, as Zhang San had mentioned, caused Shu Qing's heart rate to increase a bit. To someone with a nearly empty bag of holding, like Shu Qing, talk of that much profit was just too much of a temptation. Finally, Shu Qing took a deep breath and entered the 100 Plants workshop. After enough time passed for 2 incense sticks to burn, he walked out with all the poisonous plants he needed. Although he had spent a lot of spirit stones, he was satisfied with his purchase. This shop actually had more poisonous plants than it did vital yang plants. As far as Shu Qing was concerned, this was what a shop was supposed to be like, that claimed to specialize in plants and vegetation. After all, in the final analysis, the vast majority of medicinal plants were actually poisonous if used correctly. He even managed to buy a lot of plants that, to date, he had only read about in the medicinal codex Grandmaster Bai had given him. He was now very eager to work with them. Sadly, he hadn't found any ghost-longing horseshoe crabs. However, the shopkeeper had placed an order for him and told him he should be able to pick it up in about a month. I need to concoct some poisons that will quickly kill someone in Foundation establishment, and also something that works on sea zombies. With that, he rose into the air and hurried back to his mansion grotto on the 7th peak. Time passed as Shu Qing worked on poison concocting in his mansion grotto. Half a month went by. Then a bit of news started spreading that caused the atmosphere in Seven Blood Eyes to grow very tense. Seven Blood Eyes is going to wage full-scale war on the sea zombies.